After receiving the award, they stepped on stage and delivered an impressive version of their biggest hit. Meanwhile, Wanted Dead or Alive and Never Say Goodbye had done well on both sides of the Atlantic, ensuring Bon Jovi's status as one of the most successful transatlantic rock bands of recent years. Wanted Dead or Alive also featured the cowboy imagery that John would use several times over in the coming years, as well as the first indications of the band's future acoustic direction. By the end of 1987, Bon Jovi had played 130 shows, earning over $28 million, something which they had only dreamed of. There's no doubt that that year was the turning point for the band. With their chart success continuing and their live reputation assured, from now on things would continue to grow and grow.
Playing live is an addiction for me, personally. I mean, there's many addictions in the music business for me. Songwriting and then having it blossom into a great song with the band and recording it and having it come out good and then playing it for people on the live level, and you see people actually react to it immediately. It's very, 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 very cool.
1988 began well for Bon Jovi with another series of accolades. At the 15th Annual American Music Awards, they were voted the favourite band, another honour that was usually reserved for acts with a considerable history behind them. Shortly afterwards, the Breakout video, a compilation of all their singles so far, reached the platinum mark, selling over 100,000 copies. Unfortunately, bad news was coming. Bon Jovi's manager, Don McGee, despite being a law-abiding citizen these days, had a disreputable past. In 1982, he had been arrested for attempting to smuggle nearly 40,000 pounds in weight of marijuana into the United States from Colombia. The lengthy trial had finally come to an end in 1988, with McGee being found guilty and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Thankfully, the sentence was suspended, and McGee only faced a heavy fine and extensive community service, which included a large amount of work with anti-drugs groups. Bon Jovi saw no reason, though, to dismiss him as their manager, given his good track record with the band, and the fact that his crimes had occurred before he began to work with them. The conviction of their manager heralded a period of inactivity for the group. Concentrating on writing their next album, they felt it wise to keep away from the public eye as much as possible. Their fourth record would be a very important occasion, one that the music press would watch closely. Having achieved so much with Slippery When Wet, many critics believed there was no way they could possibly repeat that success, and were waiting for Bon Jovi to fail miserably. Keeping to the same team as before, their fourth album would be written by John, Ritchie and Desmond Child. Bruce Fairbairn was employed as producer once again, having been so effective on the previous album. The title, New Jersey, was chosen to honour their hometown, where most of the band's early gigs had been performed. Released on October 1st, 1988, it was an immediate hit on both sides of the Atlantic, climbing to number 1 in the UK and the United States. The first single, the guitar-led anthem Bad Medicine, was also a smash, quickly becoming a radio favourite. The band went back on the road in support of the album, quickly selling out all the venues. The tour was to finish in New Jersey, at a specially planned homecoming show. The first gigs of the New Jersey World Tour went very well indeed, with the fans proving just as enthusiastic as before. Only one problem occurred, and not a very serious one. John and his girlfriend Dorothea Hurley were charged with trespassing after being caught ice skating at a New York rink in the early hours of the morning. John and Dorothea, as well as the couple they'd been skating with, were eventually let off with a caution after the judge decided there'd been no forced entry and no real harm had been done. The end of tour show was a spectacular success and a surprise for Bon Jovi. The mayor of Sayreville, John's home district, presented the band with the keys to the city in recognition for services done to the area. a one-off commemorative holiday, Bon Jovi Day, was held, culminating in the band's performance that evening. The next day, a contest was held on MTV, the main prize being John's childhood home in Sayreville. The following month gave more cause to celebrate, as John married his long-standing girlfriend Dorothea. The pair had been together since they were 14 and had gone out all through high school. In typical rock star fashion, the couple were wed in Las Vegas at the Graceland Chapel, which Elvis Presley had built so he could worship in peace. Not long after, it was confirmed that Richie Sambora was currently involved with Cher, a relationship that had been rumoured for several weeks now. As usual for the band, there was a significant amount of touring to be done. This time there were several shows in the USSR, something that was still a rare event for most Western rock bands. New Jersey was also released there, with the band receiving less than $10,000 in return for licensing the album to the only Russian record company. Such a sum of money was a considerable fee by Russian standards, even though it amounted to only a fraction of what they would receive for a similar transaction in the West. 2 days later, Bon Jovi headlined the Moscow Music Festival at the Lenin Stadium, a massive charity concert held to raise money for anti-drug and alcohol programs. The most famous bands of the Western music scene were all in attendance, including Ozzy Osbourne, Motley Crue and Skid Row, as well as a host of Russian rock and metal acts. All in all, around 250,000 people saw the show, at the time the largest audience for any rock festival held within the USSR. The year ended well for Bon Jovi, although they were on the road right up until the end of December. The tour would finally wind up 2 months later, when they at last decided to take a well-earned rest from band activities.
Well, the solo Bon Jovi is certainly in a dedication to our music, dedication to our fans, dedication to rock and roll. Now we could bring it back and flavor it a little bit differently and get that fire back. I mean, there's also a dedication to having a good time. That's important.
After the mammoth tours of the previous years, Bon Jovi decided that 1990 would be spent primarily taking it easy and resting. It would be another 3 years before the band entered a studio together, but they made good use of their spare time. John was the first to announce his solo project, the soundtrack for the forthcoming movie Young Guns 2, in which John also had a small role. Featuring contributions from Jeff Beck, Elton John and Little Richard, the album was written entirely by John, with occasional help from old friend Desmond Child. The first single, Blaze of Glory, was released in September and immediately climbed to the top of the US chart after doing similar business in the UK. The song featured Bon Jovi's preferred Western imagery, which tied in with the theme of the film. The video was a typically dramatic Hollywood-style affair, with John strumming an acoustic guitar on the edge of a cliff in the desert lands of the United States. The song was critically well received, with many commentators finally acknowledging that John Bon Jovi had some talent of his own and wasn't always reliant on hired writers. Eventually, the song would earn him several awards and would be included on the Bon Jovi Greatest Hits package in 1994. The band regrouped for their first concert of the year just 1 week before it ended. The Count Basie Theatre in New Jersey was the venue for what would become an annual charity event, raising money for the Monmouth County Arts Council. The council was dedicated to providing artistic opportunities for underprivileged children in the New Jersey area, children who would not ordinarily have access to musical instruments or creative materials. The next show was on New Year's Eve, playing at the MTV End-of-Year Party, which was held in Tokyo. Bon Jovi was the headlining act, supported by Cinderella, the Choir Boys, and old friends Skid Row, who were managed by the same company. This concert was followed by a 2-week overseas tour, with the band focusing on the Far East. Meanwhile, John's first solo single was the centre of attention at many awards ceremonies. As a soundtrack single, It was eligible to be included in a number of film categories. The Golden Globe Awards voted it the Best Original Song in January 1991, and it also picked up the Favourite Pop Rock Single trophy at the American Music Awards. Overshadowing all of these, though, was the nomination at the 63rd Annual Academy Awards, where Blaze of Glory almost won the Oscar for Best Theme Song. Unfortunately, it was beaten at the final count, but John was still able to deliver a great rendition of the song at the ceremony. The band's achievements were recognised at the MTV Video Music Awards, where John had been nominated in 2 categories. He didn't win either, but as a group, Bon Jovi were presented with the Michael Jackson Video Vanguard Trophy. One of the most successful bands of the MTV generation, their videos remain a point of reference for many of today's rock acts. Richie Sambora released his first solo album, Stranger in This Town, in late September 1991. Showcasing his highly respected guitar talents, the album was a revelation, featuring as it did Richie's surprisingly professional vocal style, something which had never been a part of Bon Jovi's music. Although it received widespread critical favour, Stranger in This Town failed to appeal to the public, who saw it as little more than a curiosity and definitely inferior to John's recent efforts. Despite this, he embarked on a low-key solo tour, playing mostly small clubs and theatres rather than the arenas that Bon Jovi favoured. John's solo career continued with his contribution to an Elton John tribute album, also featuring Kate Bush, George Michael, Sting and The Who. Later on, he provided vocals for a song that appeared on comedian Eddie Murphy's R&B album, Love's All Right. David Bryan branched out on his own too, composing the score to a forthcoming sci-fi movie, Netherworld. It didn't match the success of the Young Guns 2 soundtrack, but it was more of a musical exercise than an attempt to produce a hit single. The most significant event for the band during the first half of 1991 was a change of management. They had finally managed to sever all ties with the now increasingly unreliable Don McGee. Despite his claims to be entirely law-abiding, their former manager had shown himself to be untrustworthy. After working with him for 8 years, Bon Jovi decided it was time to employ someone more professionally minded. They solved the problem by setting up their own management company, BJM, which was based in New Jersey. Over the years, they had become used to involving themselves in the band's business affairs, so it wasn't difficult to make the step to self-management. In August, Bon Jovi regrouped to prepare their first album in nearly 5 years. Producing New Jersey had been a grueling task, with the band feeling the immense pressure that was on them to come up with something as good as Slippery When Wet. If anything, these new sessions would be even harder. The rock scene had changed considerably since 1988, and many people doubted whether Bon Jovi would be able to bring out a third successful album. This time, the work would be done differently. Bob Rock, who had most recently finished working on Metallica's latest album, was brought in as producer to give the songs a harder, more contemporary edge. It wouldn't be long before Bon Jovi showed everyone that they were still a relevant force in the world of rock and roll.
This is obviously Bon Jovi making their mark into the 90s. We took a lot of extra time and care this time to make sure that we furthered our music, that we didn't stay in one spot, not to make the same record that Slippery was and that New Jersey was. It was important to take that time off after that.
Keep the Faith was released in November 1992, having been written almost entirely by John and Richie. It quickly became apparent that the new album could easily be as successful as its predecessors. Released first in the UK, it entered at the top of the charts, staying there for several weeks, and later climbed to number 5 in the United States. The first single, the title track, was also a top 5 hit in Britain.